Is your witness?
She's right here.
Ah, yes, ma'am. All right, I've had an opportunity to look over some of the case law that relates to this field, and I'll share with you my understanding of where I think we are, and then talk a little bit about the scope of the expert opinion that I think might be permitted. The state has objected based on at the time that this witness was proffered, so I want to go back to that and be a little bit more precise about the area of expertise that I think can be permissibly elicited and that which either cannot be or without further voir dire or inquiry cannot be or can be. I take some guidance from a number of cases throughout the United States on domestic spouse or battered spouse syndrome, which I don't find much authority in North Carolina in that line of cases, but there are a number from other jurisdictions. And while that isn't exactly on point, it's pretty close to what we're talking about. And there's a distinction between an expert who testifies about the general characteristics of such a syndrome and how that might manifest itself generally, and versus an expert who would be permitted to diagnose a person who exhibits such a syndrome, to make a diagnosis. And so that's one area of inquiry, is whether we are making, and the courts have said uniformly that issues of domestic abuse are not within the common knowledge of juries, and therefore expert assistance or opinions on these matters is appropriate under Rule 702. So a person with training, education, or experience in those fields certainly can offer an opinion on that. But that opinion has to be the opinion on general information about domestic abuse and a diagnosis of someone who is responding to domestic abuse are two separate areas of expertise and qualification. So based on what I've heard thus far, I'm satisfied that this witness, Ms. Gruelle, has the training and experience in the field of domestic abuse based upon her extensive experience in that field through advocacy and training. So I'm satisfied that she can testify generally as to things such as the cycle of violence, domestic abuse, its manifestations, things of that sort. I'm also satisfied that she is qualified to testify as to the general characteristics of spouses or people involved in relationships who are so general characteristics of those people who are involved in abusive relationships. In this case, I find that she would be permitted to testify based upon her interviews with the defendant, whether in her opinion the defendant's description of prior relationships constitute what, in this witness's opinion, would be domestic violence or domestically abusive relationships. So I would permit her to talk about what Ms. Mangum recounted to her as prior relationships that she had had, and for this witness to offer an opinion as to whether that constitutes domestic abuse. Now, where I think one line is drawn is, as I read in the report that was handed up to me previously, and I'm not sure that I still, yes I do. This report also offers opinions about how someone who suffers from domestic abuse might assess a threat, respond to a threat, and other typical reactions when faced with violence or a threat. I would require additional voir dire into the qualifications, expertise, or experience of this witness and any scientific basis that might substantiate opinions as how one might typically react if faced with violence or threats. That's an area that I'm not satisfied yet of the qualifications or experience of this witness. Furthermore, I would not permit a diagnosis or an opinion as to whether the way that this defendant acted was consistent with or inconsistent with someone who suffered from a history of domestic abuse, again, without a further showing of a qualification to make such a diagnosis. So where I think that leaves us is with respect to the specific question that was at issue, namely a question to this witness about prior relationships that Ms. Mangum was involved in, and whether those opinions, whether in this witness's opinion those relationships constitute domestically abusive relationships. I would permit that line of questioning, including the hearsay testimony that this witness would be relying on, and I'll provide a limiting instruction to the jury with respect to that hearsay testimony. But that may be it, unless through further voir dire I can get a sense of the training and experience of this witness to either diagnose, to make a diagnosis of any syndrome that she claims Ms. Mangum might be suffering, or to be able to predict how someone who has a history of domestic violence would react under certain conditions. That further voir dire would be required before an opinion would be allowed on either of those topics.
Okay.
All right. All right. Ms. Franks, do you have anything further?
Just asking, I know you said you're going to allow the limited instruction about past relationships. She talks about things that occurred when she was a child of 8 and sexual relationships. That's not a past domestic violence relationship. And the state would ask that that be prohibited.
Mr. Meyer?
Well, my response to that would be, certainly a parent abusing a child is if there is a domestic situation. That's what creates her problems. Any kind of a sexual relationship is almost by definition domestic, and that's what helps lead her down the path that she found herself on, that Ms. Ruel had diagnosed her on. So, I would certainly say that it is still relevant. It is still relevant to all of that, and should be allowed in, because that is what Ms. Ruel used to base her opinion.
All right, I'll allow that to be recounted as part of the history that this witness took, and again in the context of whether there's an opinion, if it forms the basis of this expert's opinion that Ms. Mangum suffered prior domestically abusive relationships, then it's going to be permitted. Now, with respect to the relationship between Ms. Mangum and Mr. Day, that I believe would not be within the scope of what I've allowed thus far. That's a relationship that the jury is aware of. This witness is going to educate the jury on what a domestically violent relationship is, what the cycle of violence is, and talk about whether, in her opinion, Ms. Mangum has prior relationships which would suggest that she might be part of that cycle of violence. But what the jury draws from that information, I think, is for the jury to determine. Now, do you want to conduct any further voir dire on the issue of the predictive behavior, namely how someone might react to violence or threats of violence if they have a history of being involved in domestically abusive relationships? I'm just not sure I've heard enough of the science or literature or body of knowledge out there that would permit me to say whether this witness is an expert in that field, that predictive behavior field.
Yes, Your Honor, I'd like to do a little bit of extra water.
All right, I'll listen to that.
Okay. Good afternoon, Ms. Gruelle. Can you describe any classes, scientific studies? Have you made diagnoses of individuals in the past?
I'm not a psychologist, so I don't make diagnoses.
Okay. Do you take steps, or have you taken classes on predicting how someone would react under certain circumstances?
My years of experience working with women who are reaching out for help because they're in violent relationships has given me a high degree of practical hands-on experience. And then also, once the lethality assessment tool was created and we began to routinely use those, we started to have a very clear understanding based on actual work with victims about what the potential is for violence given a certain set of circumstances in a relationship, and including when she tries to separate. So it's part of what I teach in the hostage negotiations class.
Okay. And can you explain, what is a lethality assessment tool?
Over the years, researchers, primarily Jackie Campbell at Johns Hopkins, looked at domestic violence homicides, and through her research and the research of other people was able to determine that leaving an abuser in fact poses a significant risk for lethal violence. And so what Dr. Campbell did and others who are domestic violence researchers is look at the trajectory of what led up to the murder-suicide, and glean from those cases that there were these predictive factors that showed that in over 50% of the cases, that when, I could go through the entire list if you'd like for me to, but the lethality assessment allows us to spend time with the victim, asking her, is there an increase in threats? Does he have weapons? Are there drugs and alcohol on board? Has he made threats to kill you in the past, etc.?
One question I would have, a lot of that is to assess the abuser and the relationship. What about your experience in how the victim would potentially respond to the abuse, be it beatings, verbal, things like that? Do you have anything about how a victim would respond to an abusive relationship?
It varies. A lot of victims wind up staying with the abuser because they think it's safer to stay and learn to live with the violence than it is to run the risk of leaving and being killed. But each case is unique and each case is individual, and they all need to be treated as such.
But do you have any basis to see the circumstances that someone is facing in their relationship and look at how they are likely to react, make predictive behavior on how they would react in that situation?
Yes.
And what would you base that on? What training or experience do you have with that?
I mean, that's based on 28 years of doing this work, and listening to women and seeing how they tried to navigate the violent situation in which they found themselves. Understanding that that meant interacting a lot with law enforcement, with the courts, civil and criminal. So, and it's just 28 years of hands-on practical experience.
Okay. You know, I would tend to her based on that, having worked in the field for 28 years and all her experience. One more question. How many cases that have gone through the court system where you've seen the abuse and the reactions have you been involved with?
Over 1,000, easily.
Okay.
Ms. Franks?
Your Honor, we would object to the state would object to her being qualified as an expert to give predictive behavior. She's not had any scientific training, any type of training at all. She's read materials that other researchers had done research on in order to become familiar with the lethality assessment. But other than her years working with women that she feels have been abused, she's had no training, no schooling, no education, no scientific training of any type to be able to give an opinion as to a predictive behavior of a particular person at a particular time.
I agree. I don't believe that the predictive behavior has been, that the training qualification for predictive behavior of how someone who has been subjected to a history of domestic abuse has been established by this witness. I think she said herself that it varies, the victim's response varies from case to case. And so I think that any testimony that a victim of domestic behavior would respond to acts of violence in this fashion or that fashion, I think would be speculative and not within the scope of expertise. Recognizing that anecdotal expertise is certainly of value, but in a field where we're predicting behavior and the witness herself has said that it varies from case to case, I think this would not be something that I would allow this witness to testify as to an opinion on.
Yeah.
So testimony as to the general characteristics of cycles of violence, domestic abuse, those patterns is permitted and has been elicited. Testimony as to whether past relationships of this defendant, not including the relationship with Mr. Day, would be permitted, and her opinion as to whether those relationships constitute instances of domestic abuse would be permitted.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
The only other thing that we may want to address, just so we don't mess up the flow, and I know we keep coming back to it, is Dr. Roberts. I have had the chance to discuss it with my client now, and
Good.
she's ready to give the final yes or no.
All right, Ms. Mangum, let me inquire of you then again. So getting back to our conversation that we had earlier in the trial and then earlier today about your instruction to your attorney to have Dr. Roberts produce a report and be prepared to testify in this case. Your attorney indicated to me before lunch that in your discussions with him, you have changed your mind on that. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor. It just caught me off guard, but we had a chance to discuss.
All right. So you are no longer instructing your attorney to call Dr. Roberts as a witness in this case. Am I correct?
No, sir.
Okay, very good. Is it Dr. Roberts? Is that the correct?
It is, Doctor. I was just curious when you said you're no longer instructing that, and she said no, sir. I was just a little confused on which.
Probably a double negative on my part, or
Right.
But that's fine. So the decision of the defense team is to not call Dr. Roberts as a witness.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. All right. Anything else that we need to take up outside the presence of the jury?
Not for the statement.
All right.
Not for the defense.
Let's go ahead and bring jurors in, please. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for your patience while we consider matters outside of your presence. The objection's overruled. Mr. Meyer, what I ask you to do is ask your question again so that we can start afresh.
Okay. Let me try to remember what the exact question was. Do we have it read back?
Question, why do you believe that she's been in a series of abusive relationships?
Yeah, okay. So, Ms. Brewer, can you explain, you had stated earlier you believe she has been in a series of abusive relationships. Can you please explain what formed the basis of that opinion, why you believe she's been in a series of abusive relationships?
And members of the jury, the evidence that you're receiving is not offered for the truth of the statements made. Namely, it was not offered in this courtroom under oath, but rather it's being admitted simply to establish the basis for this witness's opinion on these matters. Go ahead, ma'am.
When I was speaking with Ms. Mangum, she disclosed that when she was a child, she was sexually abused by a family member. And the sexual abuse had a profound effect on how she came to understand what family was about, what trust was about, what safety was about. And I think the effects of the sexual abuse have affected Ms. Mangum for a long time.
Were there other relationships that you discussed with hers that you believe would help constitute domestic violence or violent relationships?
The first relationship that we talked about was a relationship that she was in relatively early with a man who was quite a bit older than she was, who rapidly became quite controlling. And after that relationship ended, there were several more where Ms. Mangum was kind of routinely controlled, threatened, intimidated, coerced. There were certain expectations. And one of the things that stuck with me was talking with her about what constitutes a nonviolent relationship, a non-coercive relationship, a non-threatening relationship. And she told me that outside of her relationship with her dad, she'd never experienced anything like that.
So in your opinion, Ms. Mangum does have a history of being in an abusive relationship?
Objection.
Overruled.
Yes.
Nothing further.
Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, throughout all of your testimony, you keep saying her, she's a person, not your property, all women want relationships, not violence, she, when you're talking about the victim. But isn't it true men can be victims also?
Absolutely. I've worked with male victims.
And approximately how many male victims have you worked with?
In all the years that I've done this, I'd say 5.
So out of your thousands of cases, you've only worked with 5 that were males.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it true also that domestic violence against males is on the rise this day and time, going up statistically?
I think the numbers that I continue to read are that 85% of domestic violence victims are female and 15% are male.
And domestic violence with men is on the rise, correct?
I think it's on the rise in general. But yes, I think against men it is on the rise.
And also, men are less likely to report domestic violence than women, aren't they?
That's not been my experience.
Out of the 5 you've talked to?
They were quite clear about what was happening, but and their relationships fit sort of the classic pattern of one party having a high degree of a sense of entitlement, power and control issues, and things like that. So the dynamics were pretty much the same. And it's just in these very few cases it happened to be the men who were victims and the women who were the offenders.
Let me ask it this way. Statistically, men are less likely to report than females. Isn't that correct?
I think that's right.
Now, you talked about the cycle of violence that a victim goes through,
Mm-hmm.
correct?
Mm-hmm.
Abusers also go through the same cycle of violence. Isn't that correct?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, abusers, they go through the same tension building where they become critical of the victim, angry, and then there's also the incident you said, a violent incident. So the abusers are also going through a cycle, isn't that correct?
I would say that's probably correct.
And abusers also seem to choose relationships based on this cycle just as a victim does. They seem to choose the same type of person and end up abusing that same person.
Objection if she doesn't work with abusers.
Overruled.
I'm thinking in these cases that I've been involved with men. I think the dynamics were somewhat different.
And I'm not talking about men or women here. But I'm talking about, you stated that a victim ends up, because of the cycle of violence, ends up repeating the process in different relationships by choosing others to end up being abusers also.
Sorry.
What I'm asking you is, that also occurs with abusers, isn't that correct?
It can. I think it depends on if there's an intervention or not, whether it's through the criminal justice system or the civil system or whatever, but I think intervention is key.
And you said a lot of these psychological dynamics, threats of violence, intimidation, coercion, threat of authorities, things like that are used against the victims.
Mm-hmm.
And men that are victims, that same type of behavior is done to them. Isn't that correct?
I think in relationships where the male is the victim, I would expect that is correct. I just have had not much experience working with male victims.
And you said a common trigger of a violent event, the victim tries to separate from the abuser. There's a great risk of potentially fatal violence at this point in time. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
So it would be the same for a male that is a victim if they try to leave out. Isn't that correct?
I would expect so. Although, as I said earlier, it's case by case. But there does seem to be a pattern in domestic violence homicides, in particular murder-suicides, where most often the female is trying to separate from the male. And he retaliates with lethal violence towards her and then oftentimes kills himself.
But it can happen when the victim is a male, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So a male can be in a series of abusive relationships also, isn't that correct?
Yes.
Now, you said that you read over the report and you talked to Crystal about 12 hours, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
As to what you said, that Crystal told you she was sexually abused by a family member,
Mm-hmm.
how many of her siblings did you talk to about that?
I haven't talked to anyone but Crystal.
And she didn't tell anybody about this supposedly abuse, did she?
No, she didn't tell her parents until she was 20.
Now, you also said she had been in several more relationships, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
She told you about those several more relationships?
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, she told you about the one which was the older boyfriend that you told the jury about, correct? That's the first one you mentioned to the jury.
Mm-hmm.
Did you talk to that person, the male, in that relationship?
No.
The only other relationship she talked to you about was one with Milton Walker, isn't that correct?
Yes.
So she really didn't talk to you about several, did she?
No, she talked to me about several. I came into this case only recently, so I haven't even had that much time to talk to Crystal.
You didn't put in your report that she had talked to you other than more than 2 prior relationships, correct? That would be Milton and the one when she was younger.
Right.
Now, you didn't talk to Milton Walker, did you?
No, I have not.
Are you aware that she was found to be the aggressor in that particular relationship?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Did she tell you she was the one doing the domestic violence in that particular case?
No.
Did you bother to look at any reports other than you said you didn't talk to Mr. Walker? Did you bother to look at any reports to be able to determine if she was the aggressor or not?
Objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Did you?
Yes, I did.
And what type of reports did you look at?
Police reports.
Involved in that incident?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you look at all of them?
I think I did.
And you're still telling this jury that Crystal was not the abuser? She was the victim in that relationship?
I think that there was violence going both ways in that relationship.
So she was also an abuser as well as a victim, isn't that correct?
I think that's right.
And the relationship that this case is involved in can also be the same. She's also an
Objection, Your
abuser,
Honor.
isn't she? Did you talk to any of these other people that you've not described in these past relationships? Did you talk to anyone else?
No, ma'am.
So only all your conversations were based on what the defendant told you.
And the police reports.
And you know that the defendant has told different stories about what happened in this case, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained. Sustained.
Do you know anything about this case?
About this case that we're in here for?
Yes, ma'am.
I know what I know from speaking with Crystal and from the police reports that I've read.
And do you know what she has told people that has happened about this
Objection, Your Honor.
case?
Overruled.
Sorry, that's quiet. Hang
Do
on.
you know what she has told other people about what happened in this case?
Other people? I mean, I know what she told me and what's alleged in the police reports, but I don't know about things that she said to other people.
Did you ever see the show Wives with Knives?
No, I've never even heard of it.
All right, I'm going to sustain the objection at this time.
Thank you.
So the only thing you know is what she told you, right?
In the police reports.
So, and you don't know what she told you was the truth or not, do you?
I believe what she told me is the truth.
even though you didn't bother to talk to anyone else in this case.
No, but what she told me is reflected in the police reports.
So you say it's reflected in the police reports that she was the victim in the Milton Walker incident?
I'm not. Are you talking about Mr. Walker or
I'm talking
the
about
day
Mr.
case?
Walker, yes, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking we were talking about this present case.
No, ma'am, I was talking about Mr. Walker's case. Did you look at those police reports?
I did. Mm-hmm.
And in that case, there's nothing in that police report that says she was a victim, is there?
I mean, I'd have to get the file back out and look at it, but I can't remember.
You can't remember that?
I've been reading a lot, so.
And in this case, in this police report, there's nothing about what she said, what happened either, is there?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
What you read in this police report was statements made by the victim, Reginald Day, isn't that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And what officer said, isn't that correct?
Right.
And in Reginald Day's statement, he was basically saying he was the victim, was he not?
Well, yes, but he also says that he kicked in the bathroom door and pulled her out by the hair. And let's see. I mean, I've got it right here. Would you like for me to read it?
No, ma'am. What I'm saying is, he was the one that said what happened in that case, wasn't it?
He was the one what?
He's the one that gave statements about what happened, didn't he?
Yes.
And in his statements, he was the victim, wasn't he?
In his statements, he was stabbed, but in his statement also, he says that he kicked in the bathroom door and pulled her by the hair.
And he also said that Crystal got knives, tried to stab him, and he had to block the stab wounds. He said all that too, didn't he?
It does say that.
And she broke all of his property and tore up his house. Said that too, didn't it?
It does say that.
But after all that, everything he says, based on two statements, you say that the defendant is the victim.
Objection, Your Honor. You didn't talk about this case.
Sustained.
Based on what you read in this report
Objection.
and what Crystal told you,
This case was excluded.
Ms. Franks, based on my prior ruling, if you're intending to open the door, I'll allow it. If there's an objection, I'm sustaining.
basically what you've done is just listen to whatever Crystal told you, and based on that, you decided to write this report because out of the thousands of people you talked to, only 5 of those were men. So really, you don't even think men can really be victims, do you?
No, that's not true.
No further questions.
Sustained as to the form.
Just want to very briefly reinforce a few things. You provide training for law enforcement, court personnel, all kinds of folks, correct?
Correct.
Objection.
Overruled.
Okay.
Again, please, some leading questions, but I'll allow this staging.
When you provide that training, are they instructed to only look for signs of abuse on females?
No.
Do you know individuals who work with male abuse victims?
Yes.
Objection again to all leading, Your Honor.
Overruled.
In the literature, what is considered the prevailing rate of domestic violent relationships?
According to all of the data, all of the statistics, 1 out of every 4 women will be abused at some point in time in her life. And the most recent numbers that I've heard for men is 1 out of every 7 to 8 men will be abused at some point in time in their life. Okay.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
It's not a big difference there, is there? 1 out of 7, 1 out of 4, it's only a difference of 3, isn't it?
Can I answer through experience?
Just answer the question that's been posed to you.
Yes.
Yes, there is a big difference. 1 out of 7 versus 1 out of 4.
No.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, ma'am. You may step down. Further evidence for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. I'm going to call Ms. Lydia Howard, I just need to run out and grab her.
Counsel, you'll press just for a moment. Members of the jury, I'm going to need you to step into the deliberation room for a moment. Please don't discuss the case among yourselves before we express the opinion. All right. I was informed that this next witness, Ms. Howard, is that
Yes.
correct? Yes. Has been present in the courtroom at some point during this trial, which we had an order of sequestration involved. Either of you wish to be heard with respect to that matter?
Your Honor, the state would object to her testimony. She was here earlier today, and then she came in again right after lunch and saw the entire testimony today after that, and she was also here earlier, so we would object to any of her testimony coming in, as it violates a motion that the defendant made.
Your Honor, I would like to ask her, because my understanding is she's been in Burlington. The only time she's been in this courtroom during this trial was she came in right after lunch, right near the tail end of Ms. Rules. I'd like to...
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead and place the witness under oath, please.
First, let come and raise your right, please, ma'am.
You'll stand for us, please.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you now give the court in the case now being heard shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please have a seat.
Mr. Meyer.
Okay. Good afternoon, Ms. Howard.
Good afternoon.
How many times have you been in this courtroom during this trial?
I just got here about at least 20 minutes. I punched out of my job at 1:15, and I work in Graham, North Carolina.
Okay. Have you been at the other days in this trial? Have you
No,
attended?
sir. I've never been in this courthouse at all.
So you just got here probably around 3:30? Or right around when
No, I was asked to be here 2:30, and I was here at 2:30.
Okay, and when did you leave the courtroom?
When, I guess your assistant told me I couldn't be in the courtroom.
Okay. But other than that, we're not here this morning.
I've never been in this building before.
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Ms. Franks, do you have any questions?
Ma'am, you were actually in here right as soon as court started, about 2:15, weren't you?
That's yes.
And you sat here and watched the testimony and watched what went on until the assistant told you to leave, correct?
So true.
And it's now 5 minutes to 3, isn't that correct?
I don't know. Yes, that's what it says.
And you were also here right before lunch, were you not?
Oh, no. I served lunch in Graham with Peak Resources.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Okay, thank you. I'm going to permit the testimony. It is a violation of the sequestration order, but it seems to be inadvertent, and so I believe that the witness may have heard discussion outside the presence of the jury, is what it sounds like. Is that correct?
That and then maybe the tail end of Miss Kit Gruel's testimony. She didn't hear anything other than what Ms. Franks brought up remotely related to the facts of this case, and none of them were related to the facts we're going to be asking her about.
Okay, and you're calling this is an eyewitness?
Correct, Your Honor.
All right.
This is the if you want to, this is the aunt where the children were staying. Where Miss
Right, I
Mangum-
understand that, but this is not offering any opinion about prior relationships or any observation of prior relationships.
No,
It's
it's strictly
about
fact
fact witness for this event. Okay,
Yes.
I'm gonna allow the testimony. You can go ahead and bring the jurors in. I'll ask you to swear if everything. I'm gonna ask you to be sworn again when the jurors come in. All right, thank you for your patience, ladies and gentlemen. Madam Clerk, if you have the witness sworn, please.
Ma'am, please stand, place your left hand on the right, raise your right. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you shall give to the court in the case now being heard shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Mr. Meyer.
Good afternoon, Ms. Howard. Could you please state and spell your name for the jury and the court reporter?
My name is Liddy Howard. Liddy is Liddie. Howard is Howard.
Okay. Where do you currently reside, Ms. Howard?
1717 East Cornwallis Road, apartment C, that's in Durham.
Okay, how long have you resided there?
In this apartment, about 17 months.
And are you currently employed?
Yes, I am.
Where do you work?
I work for Peak Resources. I am the head dietitian.
Okay, and what does Peak Resources do?
It's a nursing home.
I want to take you back to April 3rd, 2011. Well, do you know Miss Mangum?
Yes.
How do you know Miss Mangum?
I first met her in church because we go by and greet people that come visiting. That's how I first met her. And later I met her at my sister's house.
Okay. And about how long have you known Miss Mangum?
Well, give and take a little over 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long had you known Miss Mangum as of April 3rd of 2011?
How long have I known her from
Yeah.
there?
Yes.
Past there?
Yeah, before that.
Well, I've been here 5 years, and I say I met her within the 5, maybe 3 of those years I met her.
Did you watch her kids for her occasionally?
I had her kids for a long period of time.
Okay. What about going back to April 3rd, 2011?
They were at my house.
Okay. And what were they doing at your house?
Well, she had called me and said that she wanted to go out, and would I keep the children? And I said yes. And it was so long coming till I called her. And I said, it's 11 o'clock, I have to go to bed because I have to go to Sunday school in the morning. I give you 15 minutes to be here or just don't come.
Okay.
And she came and brought the children.
Okay.
And I kept them.
Okay. Was it unusual for you to keep the children overnight?
Oh no, they have been living with me for the last 18 or 19 months. They just with her within 3 months of that time, give and take.
Okay. Now, so you were watching the kids. What happened once the kids came over?
Well, we talked a few minutes, and I said, well, you know, we got to go. I have to go to bed now. I said, if you want, RJ, if you want, that's her son. I said, if you want to watch TV, you have to sleep on the couch. And her 2 daughters and I, we went upstairs to go to bed.
Okay. And then what happened?
I can't tell you that it was 2:30 or 2:45. I cannot tell you exact that time. But I heard all this banging on my door. And then want to be the truth, tell you the truth, I'm scared of the police. And that's what it sounded like, because they have an odd knock. And when I asked who was it, she said, Crystal. And I said, why are you knocking on my door so hard? And when I opened the door, she just came on in. I said, what's wrong with you? And she said she had been in a fight. Her right side of her blouse were torn. And I cut the light on because he didn't have the light on. And it looked to me like her eye was real red. And she was just screaming and terrified. And I said, calm down, calm down. And I said, you gotta call the police, you gotta call the police. And her son did call. And he came to my house.
Okay. Did she look like she was injured?
As I said, her blouse was torn and her eye was red.
Okay. And you were there when she called 911 initially, correct? Was she at your house?
I don't know if she called 911 or her son called 911 because I got hysterical and I said, you must call the police. And I think her son was the one that called the police. But she was on the phone, but I didn't hear her say anything.
And then once the police were called and they came, what happened?
He asked me, was Crystal Mangum in my house? And I said, yes, sir. He said, where is she? I said, she's laying down on the floor.
Okay. And then what did you see? Did you see?
They gave her what I guess they call rights, and they left.
Okay. Did you see anything about their interactions with Crystal while they were there?
Only to give her her rights and to handcuff her.
Okay. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Ms. Franks?
Just a few questions. Ma'am, you kept her kids, you said for the past 17 or 18 months.
Yes.
Was that all 3 of the kids, ma'am?
Beg your pardon?
Was that all 3 of the kids?
No, just her oldest son and her daughter. But luckily, the little girl's father would always let her come because I used to take her to Sunday school.
And you were, in fact, worked out where they were going to go to the beach for spring break, didn't you?
Oh, I don't know nothing about that.
You talked to several officers, didn't you, about this case?
No,
Do you remember talking to the 2 officers that came in that night?
they just asked me, was Crystal Mangum in my house?
And you remember also talking to Officer Emmanuel, came to ask you about the kids, their names and ages?
I don't remember that.
You don't remember that?
No, I've never known nobody ask me their ages and their name. Only cops came to my house was the one that arrested her.
So you don't remember Emmanuel coming to your house at 6:30 in the morning on April the 4th, 2011, the day after this happened?
No,
And you don't remember him telling you that he needed to know the names of the defendant's children, and you had the son and daughter tell him the information?
I don't remember that.
You don't remember any of that?
No, I don't. And at 6:30 in the morning, I should have been very much awake because I have to be to work at 8, and I usually leave home at 7:15.
So you don't remember telling him that they were going to a beach trip this spring?
Oh, no.
Overall.
Oh, no.
You don't remember telling him that Crystal gave you the money yesterday?
No, she didn't give me no money, not even for keeping her kids.
And the 2 officers that came and picked her up, one of those officers asked you if the defendant had told you what happened, didn't they?
Yes, and I told him that she said she had been in a fight.
And you told her that she needed to call the police, didn't you, ma'am?
Yes.
No further questions, y'all.
And Mr. Mike?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, ma'am. You may step down.
Thank you.
Your Honor, I would ask if she can be released so she can return to work.
Any objection?
No, no.
Ma'am, you're released from your subpoena. You're free to go. Further evidence for the defense?
No, Your Honor. Defense for us.
All right. Ms. Franks, will be rebuttal evidence?
Yes, Your Honor. Just have to bring them from downstairs, upstairs, downstairs.
Yes, ma'am. So, ladies and gentlemen, the defense has now rested or concluded its evidence, and now is an opportunity for the state to provide rebuttal evidence if it so chooses.
If I may step out, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, the state would call Officer Emmanuel.
Absolutely, have a Bible ready, would you like to read? You solemnly affirm that the testimony you gave before the case now being heard shall be the truth, the whole truth, this is your solemn affirmation.
It is.
Officer, would you please state your name again for the jury?
Kevin Emmanuel.
You've previously testified in this trial.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have an occasion on April the 4th, 2011, to speak to a person by the name of Liddy Howard?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And where did you speak to Miss Howard?
At her home.
And what, if anything, what type of conversation did you have with Miss Howard?
I was tasked to get the children's name of Miss Mangum from Miss Howard.
And what happened when you got there, sir?
I spoke with Miss Howard and Miss Mangum's daughter.
Were you able to get the information you wanted?
Yes,
Did you have any other conversation with Miss Howard at that time?
I did.
What did Miss Howard tell you?
She told me that she was the care provider for Miss Mangum's children while she got back on her feet, and also that her sister, Miss Howard's sister, originally housed Miss Mangum and her children. She also told me that Miss Mangum came to her home, knocked on the door, and she answered the door, and Miss Mangum told her that he hit me, and it appeared that she had been hit in the face. And then she disclosed to me that the children were due to go on a field trip to the beach, and that Miss Mangum had given them the money for that trip the previous day of this incident.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, Mr. Meyer.
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, sir. You may step down. Further rebuttal evidence?
Yes, Your Honor. The state would call Mary Outerbridge.
Question is done, Bible ready, would you like to read, ma'am? You solemnly swear that the testimony you now give before the case now being heard shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Ms. Franks?
Thank you. Ma'am, would you please state your name and spell your last name for the court reporter?
Mary Outerbridge, Outerbridge.
And how are you employed, ma'am?
Durham County.
What do you do for Durham County?
I work for the library.
Did you know Reginald Day?
Yes, I did.
How did you know Reginald Day?
We were together for 11 years.
When you say together for 11 years, was that in a relationship?
Yes, ma'am.
At any point, did you ever live with Reggie, or did Reggie ever live with you?
We stayed together up until 2010.
In the same home?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, on April the 3rd, 2011, were you still dating Reggie, or had y'all broke up?
We were still seeing each other, but we had some things that we needed to work out, you know.
Why did you two stop living together?
Because most of our problems were Reggie he was just too giving to people, and I'm like, you know, we need to really focus on home and what home first, rather than you going out feeling sorry for other people, giving them money which they don't really need.
During I'm sorry.
He just tried to help too many people.
During your 11-year relationship, would you describe how Reggie acted during that relationship? If you two ever argued or anything?
If we were to argue, either I would leave or he would leave. Reggie never hit me, never raised his hand to me, nothing of that nature.
Did you ever do anything to him?
Maybe pushed him.
Whenever you would push him or do anything, what would he do?
Sit down or either leave.
Now, did he drink?
Yes,
What did he drink?
Budweiser.
Is that all he ever drank?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know whether or not he had some kind of container that would hold cognac or liquor or anything like that?
In the living room.
And do you know anything about that container, how he got it, or why it was important to him?
I think he paid some good money for it, and he just liked it for the decoration. Right there, like when you walk in through the front door. And I think it was like off to the left by the couch in the living room.
Did you ever see him put anything in it?
No.
When's the last time you saw Reggie?
It was that Monday or Tuesday before the stabbing
And where did you see him on that day?
at my house.
Would you describe how his demeanor was at that time?
He was dressed real nice. Had on a pair of slacks, a shirt, nice jacket. And he came in, he was thinking that maybe my cousin and his wife were at my home, but they weren't. But we sat down and we talked and we laughed. And he told me that he would get back in touch with me. He asked me that I wanted to play spades Friday with Carlton and Nisa, and I told him yeah. And so he told me that he would call me with a time to pick him up.
Now, during this 11 years, I know you talked about how you and Reggie were in arguments. Did you ever see him violent in any way during that 11 years?
No, man. If anybody, it was, I would get out of character, and just like I said, either he would leave or I would leave, and he'd probably end up over at his Aunt Sandra's house.
Thank you, ma'am. No further questions.
Mr. Meyer.
Good afternoon, Miss Outerbridge or Otterbridge?
Outerbridge.
Outerbridge. During the times you dated Mr. Day, you said he never screamed at you?
I mean, we raised our voice. I didn't say he didn't never scream at me. We raised voices. We never passed licks. He never lifted his hand towards me in all that time.
Did he ever drag you down the hall by your hair?
No, he did not. I just said he never touched me.
Okay. Did he ever kick down a door to get at you?
No. It wasn't that kind of fighting and that kind of arguing, no way. Wasn't anything violent like that.
Okay.
He wasn't a violent person.
Okay. But you did say he did have a tendency to drink too much?
I did not say that. I just said he drank.
Okay. When you gave your interview, you talked with Officer Bond. You just said now that you were dating for 11 years. Didn't you tell Officer Bond it was 9 years?
No, I did not. Ever since the trade center went down, that's when we started dating.
Okay. Then you didn't tell Officer Bond that?
No, I did not.
You didn't even hear the question before you answered no. Okay. You never told Officer Bond that he drank too much?
No.
Okay. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Ms. Franks.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you, ma'am. You may step down.
Your Honor, we'd ask that she be released so she can go back to work.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, ma'am. You're released from your subpoena. You're free to go.
Your Honor, that's the state's rebuttal.
All right, re-rebuttal?
No, Your Honor.
All right, very good. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the evidence portion of this trial. There are still 2 important steps to go before you begin your deliberations. Those are the closing arguments of counsel and my instructions to you on the law. I'm going to need some opportunity to confer with counsel about the closing instructions that I'll be giving to you, the instructions on the law that I'll be giving to you after you hear the closing arguments. And that's going to take us a little bit of time this afternoon. So what I'm going to do is recess for your benefit this afternoon and ask you to return tomorrow morning at 9:30. When you return tomorrow morning, I expect we will be in position to move directly into the closing arguments of counsel, my instructions on the law, and then I expect that sometime before lunchtime you should have this case for deliberation. So that's the schedule that will follow. It's very important that you continue to follow all the rules and instructions I've given you. Don't talk among yourselves or with anyone else about this case. Don't form or express any opinions about the outcome. No media or independent investigation regarding these matters. And please have no conversations with parties, witnesses, or lawyers. Leave your notebooks in your chairs. Thank you very much for your service, and we'll see you at 9:30 tomorrow morning. All right, outside the presence of the jury, any motions to be made at the close of all the evidence?
Yes, Your Honor. Renew the motions to dismiss that we had done at the close of state's evidence.
All right, those motions are denied. What I'd like to do is take a recess, during which time I'll print out a draft set of jury instructions that I have prepared. When we return, we'll begin a charge conference. Do either of you have any specific charges that you wish to hand up or for me to consider? I'll do it during the recess. If not, we'll, of course, discuss the charge.
I just want to make sure you consider the instruction on self-defense, Your Honor.
Yes, sir. Ms. Franks, do you have anything you want to hand up at this time?
I don't have anything to hand up, but we would ask for the flight also.
All right.
Address that.
We'll address those when we come back and talk about the specific instructions that we'll give. I'll print out a copy of them for you, and as soon as the clerk prints them out, we'll have them ready for your review. We'll be in recess then for, let's take a 20-minute recess till 20 minutes till 4.
Most of you